Hello guys, welcome back to Mallikarjun channel, and this is Mallikarjun. Yesterday we have covered about the runcluvfy pre-checks. So when you are trying to install your grid infrastructure setup, and runcluvfy pre-check is very important. And we have seen this runcluvfy pre-check, and we have hit some issues, and and also we have fixed all those issues, and the runcluvfy pre-checks was successful, and then I ignored a couple of fail checks. Basically those are like NTP, and then the memory size, and then some network checks. Those are like safely we can ignore it. And today in this session I'm going to start with this 12c clusterware installation. So let's start with the today's session, and then before I go ahead with the installation, if you are new to my channel, always go back to YouTube and then search for Malik034, and then please do subscribe. If you like my videos, please share, like, and comment. So let's start with the the install and configuration of grid infrastructure. So install and configure grid infrastructure, that is very simple. So you can just run your gridSetup.sh. You can see a gridSetup.sh. Okay, configure Oracle grid infrastructure for a new cluster. Configure Oracle grid infrastructure for a standalone server, or upgrade the grid infrastructure. So I'm going to go with the first option, that is the new cluster installation, and configure Oracle standalone cluster. So you just go through all the standalone cluster, domain server cluster, member cluster, and member cluster for application. All are this type of clusters, and each has its own advantages and disadvantages. So basically, ideally, we go with this the standalone cluster for the basic operations. So I'll just select the first option, standalone operation, standalone clusters, and you can give your cluster name. I can check it out. What is my scan name? So VL6 scan. So then I'll go with the VL6 cluster, and the scan name is going to be VL6 scan 1521 default port, and go next. And this is node 1. I'm going to add the other node. It's going to be OEL6 node 2 dot local domain.com, and the virtual name is going to be OEL6 node 2 hyphen VIP dot local domain.com. Add. Both the cluster nodes are added here. Go next. It will do all the validations here. Okay, so validation is done. Ethernet 0 is my public IP address, and Ethernet 1 is my private IP address, and Ethernet 2 I'm not going to use that one, so do not use that. So proceed further. So you can use configure ASM on NFS, configure ASM using block device. Configure ASM using block device. And do you want to create a separate automatic storage management disk group for your MGMT, management repository database? I'm not going to do it. I will go ahead with this same data disk group for all ASM, all management repository database, and all my other databases. So I'll just go with the no option and proceed further. I'm going to create a data disk group with the external redundancy, and I'm going to discover my disks. That is if I can quickly go back, you dev Oracle ASM disks. This is a directory, and if you can do ls-ltr, you can see all the disks. So I'm going to give this particular path here, and I can give disk star. I can see all the disks got discovered now. So I'll select all this data 1, data 2, data 3, all these 3 disks together, and I'm going to view. This is the MB, you can see, right? it is approximately 20 GB it is going to each disk, and it becomes 60 GB altogether. That's the reason I'm going with the external redundancy. You can go with a normal, high, or whatever. So I'll just select external as of now. Proceed further. I can use same password for sys. Okay, so continue. And as I explained earlier, IPMI is one of the new, I can say, new method of node controlling your node eviction. So I'm not going to cover what is IPMI. So IPMI basically use it for, if you want to connect to a console, it's a console connection, and you can forcefully evict the node. If it is unhealthy, you can evict it from the clusterware. So I'm not going to use that IPMI. I'll continue and register with AM Cloud. No, I'm not going to register. And you can choose your disk group. So sorry, your group, primary group and secondary group. So grid, I have all the, for the grid user I have o install DBA, ASM DBA, ASM admin, everything. I select ASM admin, ASM DBA, and ASM Opera. I don't have it, so I leave it blank. This one. If you have it, you can use ASM Opera. Oracle basis user and app Oracle. Continue. Specified Oracle base location is not empty. So yeah, that's true, because if you go into user one app Oracle, you will be having your Oracle user and app Oracle. So it is empty here. And if I go to node one, it is user one app Oracle. So it has the data here. That's the reason it is giving, it is not empty. So I'll just ignore it, and I'll proceed further. Continue. This is automatically run the configuration script. At the end, it will ask you to run the root.sh script, so that you can run it manually, or you can do it automated way of running. So I'm going to run it manually at the end of the cluster installation. Okay, so it's again doing that runcluvfy pre-check whatever we did it. Okay, so the pre-checks are done. So device check for ASM I can ignore, because I know this is a ignorable pre-check. Access control list, again this is also ignorable pre-check. This is a VM box I'm using it. So these are the wrong false alerts. And NTP we know, and physical memory we know. So we'll ignore all this, and I'll proceed further. So the point to be noted here, like when you are working with your real application cluster in the live environment for any of the customer, so you have to be extra careful, about all these fail checks. You have to take care with extra attention, which one to ignore and which one to not to ignore. Okay, this is about the summary. So you can verify all these settings and all this option, whatever you selected. And if you want, you can save this response file. I just mentioned 12c grid, and I'll proceed with the installation. Yeah, these are the phases. It will start configure local node. It will prepare on the local node first, and the preparation is done, and it is started linking the library binaries, and then it will start with the setup. And once the setup is done, it will start copying files to the remote nodes. And once the configuration of remote nodes is done, that's again same thing it will do, prepare and setup, and then it will set up base, and it will ask us to execute the root script. And then the final step is configuration of Oracle grid infrastructure for the cluster. This particular last step will span again around 5 to 6 steps, like creating your SNCA configuration assistant and management repository database, and some other cluster verification checks and post install checks. Everything it will start here. Let it go on. Okay, so linking binary is done, and it is started the setting up. It is saving all the inventory, central inventory, local inventory, and then all the repository it will set up, and then it will start with the operation on the remote nodes.
So if I can go to node 2 and if I can check this particular grid, and right now this grid home does not have anything. So once it start with this remote operations, I can see all the binaries, my grid binaries are started coming there. You can see copying files to the remote node is started here. Go back to this node 2. Yeah, you can see here now all the files, all the binaries are started coming here. This is on node 2. This setup will take a quite longer time, and you can refer it by clicking this detail steps, and that will give you uh, clear information which step it is executing and what it is doing. You can see the copying binaries to the remote nodes. Still it is doing the remote copy operation, so it is still if I can check what is the size of that, run app 12 to d-sh grid. Okay, it's of 7 gig. So if I can go to node 2 grid, it's a 5.6 gig now. So it's going on. Operation copying remote node is done, and then started configuration of remote nodes. Again, it will do the preparation step is done, and then it's doing the setup now. Okay. You can see here the remote node setup also done, and then it started it prompted us to run this user and app 12201 grid root.sh. This is the actual script which will do my clusterware setup. So I'm just running it on node 1 and node 2. So I'll run it on node 1 first, and this is my node 1. I'm a root user now. I'll run it here, user and app 12201 grid root.sh. If I can minimize this one, okay, yeah, I'll just click enter. Relinking Oracle with RAC on option, and it basically has 18 to 19 steps. All 18 to 19 steps it is going to execute it here now. Once you run this root.sh script on node 1 and node 2 as a root user, and you can come back here and then you can click on OK. So then your clusterware setup will be done. And this is a log file. You can tail this log file for the more information. You can see executing installation step 1 of 19. It has 19 steps. The step 1 is for setup my TFA, Oracle Trace File Analyzer. Executing installation step 2 of 19, that is validate environment. And the step 3 is check first node, and it verify whether this is the first node or not. And step 4, it is your site GUID, generation of this site GUID. It will generate your site GUID. And step 5, it will save your parameter file. This is the parameter file. You can see here, right? Grid CRS install CRS config underscore params. And step 6 is about setting up OSD. Step 7 is of check CRS config, and step 8 is for setting up your local GPNP profile. Grid plug and play GPNP. Step 9, your OLR local repository. It will configure your OLR on this local node, that is node 1. Okay, step 10 is of configuration of chmos, and step 11 is create your OHASD, Oracle High Availability Service daemon, and step 12 configure OHSD. So first step is create, and then the config, and then once the configuration is done, it will start my OHSD service. And then you can see the configuration is done, and then adding a cluster where entries to oracle-ohsd.config file. This is a configuration file which will run run when you start your clusterware. That this is a file which has all my configuration, all my OHSD and cluster related configuration files. The wrapper script, we can call it as the wrapper script. Whenever you start your clusterware, that will read your init tab /etc init tab, and in the init tab there's a run level 5. Run level 5, we have defined our OHSD wrapper script, which will run it during the node reboot or node restart, or during the clusterware startup or shutdown. That script plays a very important role. We call it as a wrapper script. Okay, so step number 13, install AFD. Step number 14, install ACFS. And then you can see starting shutdown of Oracle High Availability Service on this node 1, and it has stopped now, and now it started. Now here it started. Oracle High Availability Service has been started. During this installation, this OHSD will go for multiple shutdown and startup. Each major service deployed, that time it will go for shutdown and startup. And after your this is one time, it's already went down and came up here, and again it will go for multiple times shutdown and restart. And you should be very careful when you are when you are particularly running this gridSetup.sh. You have to start this gridSetup.sh in a screen mode when you are working on the putty session, or on the mobile exterm, or when you are connecting to your server with any of your putty session. You have to enable your putty interactive session, and you have to keep that session alive a longer period, and better you can start it in a screen mode and then start this grid setup. Because if this setup goes inactive, and your clusterware installation will fail. So you have to keep this session alive. Okay, so Oracle High Availability started, and then step 15, install KA. Step 16, init configuration is done, and again you can see here it went for shutdown, and Oracle High Availability Service has been stopped, and then Oracle High Availability Service has been started now here, and it's attempting to start all my resources. You can see EVMD, MDNSD, and GPNPD, CSSD monitor, GIPCD, CSSD monitor, and diskmon, CSSD, all the cluster services, right? Cluster daemons, it is starting now. Okay, disk group created successfully. That data disk group, whatever we defined, that disk group created, and this is a log for that ASMCA. You can refer it, and this is the upgrade grid install. Running this command and attempting to start this CRF storage, and start CRSD, and updated the profile, and successfully addition of voting disk. This is the UUID of that voting disk. Successfully replaced voting disk to the data disk group, and this is my voting disk group. Since I created external redundancy, it created only one voting disk. And if I created normal redundancy, it could have created 3 voting disk. And if I could have created a high redundancy, then it could have created 5 voting disks. So far so good. So we have completed 16 steps, 3 more steps to go. Okay, so it has done the shutdown and startup of my clusterware again. So successfully started my clusterware, successfully stopped again here, and step 17, start cluster. Okay, it has done shutdown here, and is all going down, all cluster services here, and then completely shut down my cluster, and then now it is starting my cluster again. Okay, so as you can see, step number 17, all clusterware service startup. Clusterware service startup is done here. Successfully started clusterware. You can see successfully started clusterware stack. And step number 18, config node, and it is going to configure this local node.
Okay, so attempting to start ASM listener done, and attempting to start ASM, and it's done. Attempting to start data disk group, that is done. Okay, so executing installation of step 19, that's a final step, that is a post configuration is doing. So with that, I hope like node 1 configuration is almost successful. Let's wait for a few more minutes, it will be done. Okay, so this is very happy situation, I can say, because when you see this succeed message at the end, that feels good. Configuration of Oracle grid infrastructure for a cluster is successful. So let's quickly run the same command on the node 2. I have node 2 here, and I'm going to run the same command. Again, in this node 2 also, it will do the same thing. It will do all those 19 steps here. The relinking rack on option is done, and now this is a log file, and started with the step 1 again, that is starting with the TFA installation. Okay, the TFA is done. Step 2, the validate environment, and step 3, check for the first node. Step 4, generate setup site GUIDs. Step 5, save parameter file. Again, as I said, this is my parameter file. And then step 6, setup OSD. Step 7, check CRS config. Step 8, setup local GPNP. Step 9, config OLR. Step 10, config CHMOS. Step 11, create OHSD. Step 12, config OHSD. And then this will add this node 2 to my node 1. Here it is not going to do the fresh new installation, it is going to add or join this node to my already installed node 1, that is the cluster node 1, and adding a clusterware entries to this Oracle OHST config script. Okay, step 13, install AFD, and step 14, that is install ACFS, and again shutting down my OHSD, and OHSD stopped here, and it is starting OHSD now again. You can see OHSD is started now. Okay, so now step 15, install KA. Step 16, init config, and starting shutdown of OHSD, and OHSD has stopped here, and again OHSD has started here. Okay, so OHSD has started here, and then step number 17, start cluster here. As I said, like this particular root script will take longer time, and it will do a multiple shutdown and startup of my OHST service, and it's doing the final startup of my cluster here, and then it will do the post configuration. Okay, so you can see it has started my clusterware here, all the services. You can see Oracle high availability service has been started and successfully started Oracle clusterware stack. And step 18, config node, and then the step number 19 is a post check. Okay, step number 19, that is a post config step. In a few minutes it's going to complete on this node 2, that is a remote node 2, and then we will go back to node 1. Okay, it's done now. You can see again, it feels so good, right? So when you see this success message, configuration of Oracle grid infrastructure for a cluster is succeeded. So we'll go back to node 1, and then we will click OK on this particular the pop-up window.
Click OK. Okay, you can see execution of root script is done, and now it started the configuration of Oracle grid infrastructure for a cluster, that is updating inventory, Oracle net services, ASM storage configuration assistant, and the creation of container database, that is management repository database, and GIMR configuration assistant, and Oracle cluster verification utility. You can see here saving cluster inventory and starting update inventory. And let it run this one, and meantime we can check all these cluster services here. On the node one, if we can see smon, I can see my ASM is running, and if we can see ps-ef grep d.bin, all the cluster daemons, you can see all the cluster daemons, all the listeners. So everything is running here. So if I do .orinv plus asm1 crstl stat resource -t, yeah, all the services are online here, you can see, and you can see -init, all the core daemon services, all are online. You can see ASM cluster interconnects, CRF, CRSD, CSSD, CSSD monitor, CTSSD, diskmon, SFS drivers, EVMD, GIPCD, GPNPD, all this MD, NSD, and storage, all are online. Similarly, if I go to node 2 and do ps-ef grep smon, I can see my ASM2 here, ps-ef grep d.bin. You can see all the service daemon, cluster resource daemon, and listeners, everything is up and running here. And again, you can set your environment to asm2.orinv plus asm2 crstl stat resource -t. You can see all the cluster resource services, everything is online. crstl stat resource -t -init, all these core services, all are online here. That's good. Go back. Creating container database for grid infrastructure management repository. So that is mgmt database. That's a 12c the future, right? So it will create any of the one node. It will create in any of the one node. So right now it is not yet created in any of the node. You can see only ASM is running. ASM is running, so it will take few minutes, and management database will be ready. I can see more details here. Starting creating container database for this management repository. Registering database with the Oracle grid infrastructure, copying database files, and we can log into ASM also, ASMCA. So what I will do, I'll minimize this one, I'll log into grid, and I will set the environment.orinv plus asm1 asmca or asmcmd -p. You can see ls data, you can see here, go inside data, ls, you can see management db, it is creating management db now. I have asm here, I have, this is Vora pwsm, and Vora pwsm, this is the backup of my password file, and this is actual my asm password file. You can see asm password file. This is the current ASM password file, and this is the backup of that password file. And this is my management repository database. And this ASM this ASM directory has my all the what I can say,
You can see this password file was the I can say link to this particular password file. So if I go inside and do ls-l, you can see password file, and this is password file, and this is the backup, and this is the current password file, and they basically are in the data asm and password directory, and then are given this soft link to my data disk group. If I again go back to data and do ls-l, and these are the two files are soft linked. And if I can go inside my management directory, you can see data files. So this is my management repository data file, and it has all the data files here. Okay, let it go on. Let's see where it is now. Still creating, copying database files. It will take a quite few minutes, and you can see these are like the commands for that creating database. Oracle home, and instant type, and all these are the parameters. These are the response file and the silent method. All this argument, it is passing it, and it is creating the database. Creating and starting the in Oracle instance. Copying database files is done. Now it is the creating and starting the database instance. So if I can go back, and if I do that ps-ef grep smon, okay, still it is not starting. It will take few more minutes. Okay, now you can see here the management repository instance. ps-f grep smon, you can see mg empty database. So you can, if you observe it start with -mg empty database, and this is like RAC one node database. When this particular cluster goes down, or this management database goes down here in this node 1, automatically it will start it in this node 2. Right now in this node 2, there won't be any management database. That is a single instance. At any time it will run on any of the one cluster node. Right now it is running on node 1. Okay, so creating and starting the instance, it is almost done. And if you can see here right now, so the management database has all the data file, temp file, online log file, data file, control file. And if I can check what is the size of that, it will be small in size, obviously. So du-du, sorry, 3000 MB. It's just of 3944 MB, almost like 3 to 4 GB. Once this installation is done, so we will do these 4 checks: CRCTL query, CSS software version, active version, release patch and release version, and what is grid bin oracle, this binary sticky bit and MD5 sum, and what are the patches it has applied. Okay, finally completing database creation. That's great. You can see this, you can read this: completing database creation. MGMT database creation is done. Okay, so finally completed my management database repository creation, and started with GIMR configuration assistant. Complete creating container database for Oracle Grid Infrastructure Management repository, starting GIMR configuration assistant. So right now, if you can run this one, I just wanted to show you this particular command. Let me. Okay, it's already set now here. These are all command. If I run it here on node 1, it is at the post installation now. You can see CSTL query CSS software version, that is 12201, and active version, that is 12201, and cluster upgrade set is normal. Cluster active patch level is 0 because I have not applied any of the patch.
and the release patch is 0, no patch applied on that, and the release version is 12.2.01. This is the release version, so no patch applied on that. So if I do md5 sum of my the Oracle, this library file, this is my md5 sum output, and if I do ls patches on this grid home, right now there are no patches. That is why you see you saw this particular patch level, right? It will not tell any patch, so patch cannot continue for the root user. So fine, like let me log in as a grid user dot .inv plus sm. Okay, let me run this one. On the grid home, I have not applied any of the patch. I just it is at the base release. There are no interim patches on this grid home. Okay, it's still going on. Same command we will do it on the node 2 as well. So we will run this one. We'll run one at a time now. So the software version is 12.2.01 and the active version is 12.2.01. Cluster state is normal and the cluster patch level is 0. As I told, like no patches are applied on this newly installed grid home. So the patch release patch is 0 because no patch applied. And if I can check release version, that's the base release 12.2.01. And if I check md5 on this node, and then I can compare with this node 1 and node 2, md5 02.02c, and if I can go back here, md5 02c. So make sure this u01 app 12.2.01 grid bin oracle, this is the binary file, so it should always have the same md5 sum output on all the cluster nodes. You can see all this sticky bit. You can see instead of execute, there's a s here, read, write, and s is a sticky bit, and you can see sticky bit and execute. So this is very important file, this oracle file, and I can see 02c ending with 02c and node 1, and similarly ending with 02c and node 2. So it is same here. And if I can check the patch on this node 2 also, there will not be any patch, right? There are no interim patches installed on this oracle home. That's a grid cluster infrastructure home. So that's it. So let's see when this will get complete, and then we'll be done with our cluster installation. Okay, so finally the GIMR configuration assistant is successful, and now it started with the cluster verification utility. You can see all this cluster verification utility, it is running here, all the runcluvfy checks. With that, we are almost done with the installation. Yeah, it will do all the verification, scan, VIPs, private IPs, and all the cluster resources management, repository and integrity, UMask, and OCR, OLR, all the checks it will do. And this is failed here. You can see access control list and device check for ASM. This we are aware that we only ignored it during the installation. You can see NTP also failed because NTP also we only ignored it during the installation, right? So this can be this can be ignored again. Collecting OS mandatory requirement baselines. Okay, almost done. Collecting OCR integrity. So these all are the post checks, part of post checks. Collecting GPNP profile. Verifying ASM mandatory requirement. Okay, verifying ASM best practices. Okay, fine. So at the end, this is the known error or known fact. Oracle cluster verification utility will fail because of some of the script checks. So if you read this one, you will get to know what are this NTP and and the network connectivity. So this can be ignored. So I'll just click OK. I am fine with this because it's a known issue, and then I can go to next and I'll complete my installation. Click yes, and that's done. The configuration of Oracle grid infrastructure for a cluster was successful, right? So click close. And as we already verified, PSF grep SMON, and also we have seen our cluster active version and all, and also we have seen CRSCTL stat resource -t -init, right? Everything is online, all the cluster resource, everything is online. So that's it for the today's session. So we'll see tomorrow with the database creation, with the Oracle home installation, and then with the database RAC database creation. Thank you guys.